So just how dumb is the Trans Mountain Pipeline? Energy return on investment, or EROI, is the most common metric used to determine the profit potential of any energy project. With conventional drilling, spending the energy of 1 barrel of oil will produce roughly 25 barrels of oil. But the average EROI for most tar sands oil is less than 3 barrels of oil per barrel used to produce it. And even those numbers might be inaccurate because the government doesn't make the companies mining this crud pay for the carbon emissions that they're causing, or the health and climate issues that those emissions cause, or the carbon sequestration costs of the boreal forest that's been cut down in order for these companies to get at the sands that they're mining. The boreal forest is among the best tools that we have for removing CO2 from the atmosphere, but we're cutting it down at an alarming rate in order to produce the world's dirtiest oil. And what did we do with all this wood? It's not good for building things, but it makes great toilet paper. So we're literally flushing our future down the toilet to support the narrow profit margins of this dirty and inefficient industry. In fact, Charles Hall, the professor who coined the term EROI back in 1979, indicated that if all of the costs that the government is letting this industry get away with were included in the EROI calculation, the ratio would actually be about 1 barrel of oil expended for every barrel of oil that's produced. Can you imagine that? In other words, tar sands oil is a complete waste of time, money, and resources. But it is very good at spewing carbon into the atmosphere. The Canadian government, whether run by the Liberals, the Conservatives, or the NDP, continues to let these companies get away without paying the true full costs of their businesses. All three of these parties support subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. We're currently producing about 700,000 barrels a day of the world's dirtiest oil to keep these companies in business. It's a result of all this volume. The companies need a way to get their sludge to the world market. And that means that we need pipelines to bring the sludge from Alberta to the coast. Well, maybe. Studies have shown that bitumen can be compressed into solid blocks that are relatively non-toxic, non-combustible, and that can be safely transported to the coast by rail for shipment to Asia with almost no hazardous risk from accidents. Which finally gets us to the question of how dumb is the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Having been born of the exceedingly dumb tar sands industry, the Trans Mountain Pipeline manages to compound the stupidity by adding the calamitous risk of leaked dilbit, a substance so toxic it's nearly impossible to clean up when it spills. And the Trans Mountain Pipeline crosses the lands of 15 sovereign First Nations. Many of these First Nations want nothing to do with the risk of a dilbit spill onto their traditional lands or into their waters. It became very clear to Kinder Morgan that the sensible concerns and demands and the opposition of First Nations along the pipeline route was going to take a great deal of time and cost a great deal of money to resolve. So it decided that the best thing it could do was scrap the pipeline and take the write-down on what it had invested up to that point. Enter Justin Trudeau, the climate champion prime minister who proudly signed the Paris Accords in 2015, promising to achieve substantial CO2 reduction targets by 2030 and 2050. The man who literally declared that we're in a climate emergency on one day and bought a dilbit pipeline the next. A pipeline that, if completed, virtually guarantees that we cannot meet the targets that he had so enthusiastically agreed to. This same man who supported legislation to abide by the reconciliation principles of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and then made it clear that he would run roughshod over them in order to complete the pipeline. And let us not forget that the countries in Asia that are the market for that dilbit are all choking on bad air and sweltering in rising temperatures, and are desperately working to transition to clean energy at a faster pace than we are. For how much longer are they going to be the market for the world's dirtiest oil? It's a project that risks catastrophic damage to land, to water, farming, and wildlife from leaks along every kilometer of its route, and then compounds that risk by increasing hazardous tanker traffic in an already crowded port, where a single accident could shut down all commercial and subsistence fishing in the lower mainland and severely impact tourism as well. And all this to further support an industry that would be losing money without government funding, an industry that absolutely must sunset as soon as possible in order to avoid climate feedback loops that would destroy our civilization and literally turn the planet over to some surviving insects. So if you love cockroaches, the Trans Mountain Pipeline makes perfect sense. But for anyone else, not so much.